All right, and welcome to this webinar on career development and creating your own future vision. Now, the objective of this webinar is a number of things. First of all, get you much clearer about your future career development and your future vision. We also want to take you through a process, which is our own unique process called VisionCasting, which we've developed over the last 10 or 12 years. We want to talk about also your own personal blueprint. How do you identify your skills, interests, values and personality, and how is that useful as a debriefing process for the vision casting? Because this will really, both these will really come hand in hand in helping you create more informed decisions about your future and your future career development. We then also want to just touch on identifying what are some of the obstacles and barriers getting in the way of your own future moving forward. And typically they're things like I don't have enough time, money, confidence, skills, resources, tools or support, those sort of things. So let's get into the whole principle of career development and future vision. You know, many people know what they don't want. Fewer know what they really do want. And that can be frustrating for many. It can be a challenge for many. If we look at the typical growth curve, so over time, typically people want to grow. And if you look at this sigmoid curve, you'll see in many situations, you know, if you're starting out in a new role, you might be here on the learning curve and starting out, and then you get to a point here when you're doing most of what you're doing work pretty comfortably, and then the red dot's kind of in the stagnation zone or the danger zone, where if you continue doing what you're doing, you potentially can stagnate and go over the curve. So I'm a big fan of trying to, I guess, create a preemptive strike and try and get more clarity moving forward. So you've got vision for yourself and you're actually putting yourself in the driver's seat of your own career moving forward. Because down here I reckon it's too early and here's too late. So if you can start to look at where do you want to move to moving forward within your role, this can be really useful and really creates a self-leadership, a self-responsibility sort of approach. Because many people go, well, look, yeah, okay, my work's okay, but I'm actually going to use the strategy of retirement as being my main strategy for improving my lifestyle moving forward. And if you look at the business card for retirement, it might look something like this. No stress, no worries, no ulcers, no time issues, no loneliness, no problems. What a great lifestyle retirement's sold us to be. But retirement's the 11th most stressful thing in people's lives. 76% of retirees last year said they were disappointed by retirement. So in reality, the business card for retirement looks more like this. No work, no money, no interest, no meaning, no friends, no hobbies. I showed this to a friend of mine recently. He's about 40. He said, actually, my life looks like this now. So I think the whole thing about the retirement strategy isn't necessarily a good one. There's a lot that we can do to improve our situation now. And I think it really comes down to, I'm a big believer in, yes, what can we do now, understanding ourselves now, and this is things like, you know, looking at what are my interests, skills, values, personality, profile, you know, who am I now? If I know who I am now, I'm more likely to know what I want in the future. And if I know what I want in the future, it's very much like hope for the future gives me much more power in the now. So instead of waking up each day and sort of living on the same treadmill, if you've got a vision for the future that's exciting and inspiring for you, A, you'll know what the strategies are to get there more likely, and B, hope for the future does give you more power in the now. So what we want to do is we want to take you now through a process. And this is a really powerful process. We've been using it, as I said, for about the last 10 or 12 years. So what I'm going to ask you to do, if you could, is grab a couple of sheets of paper. And let me just give you a second while you do that. So what I want you to do is just grab a couple of bits of paper and a pen. I'm going to take you through this vision casting process. All right, now there's 3 rules to this particular exercise. And it's really all about giving yourself permission to design your ideal future. Very rarely do we ever give ourselves the opportunity or permission to sit down just for 10 or 15 minutes and design our ultimate future. Now this particular board here I'm showing is my, what I call my utopia board. I sat down one day and for about 4 hours cut out all these pictures of what ideally I'd like my life to look like, and it very much is really my utopia board that I use for myself. So it's a way of giving myself a visual clarity of where I want to be moving forward in my life. We're going to kind of do the same, but I want to take you through a process in a written form to start with. And as I said, there's 3 rules to this exercise. And I'm not a big stickler for rules necessarily, but these are kind of guidelines really. So the first one is, and I'll repeat this as we go through, but the first one is, what I'd like you to do is imagine that it's now 5 years in the future. So let's just say if we're in 2011, it's now 2016, and I'd like you to answer all the questions I'm going to ask you as though we are coming back, looking back at 2011, looking back over the last 5 years. And so it's now, let's just say, 2016. Everything has gone perfectly for you over the last 5 years. And the third rule is, you know the answer to every question I'm going to ask you. Even if you don't, you're just going to imagine that you do. So they're the 3 rules. It's now 2016, or 5 years in the future. You're now looking back. We're just catching up. I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions, and you know the answer to every question. And basically, everything's gone perfectly over the last 5 years. All right. So let's get started. So we're going to start general and get more specific. So just try and lock yourself in a mental space just for the next about 10 minutes. So the first question is, so what are you doing? It's now 2016. It's 5 years down the track. You're now looking back. So what are you doing? Are you doing the same sort of role that you had 5 years ago? Are you in another role, or are you working for another organisation, or are you doing your own thing? You're self-employed. So just your call. So what are you doing? You're working for yourself, working for someone else, you're doing the same sort of thing, or are you in a new or different role within the organisation? So imagine that you knew the answer. Imagine everything's gone perfectly for you, and just jot down the answer to that question. Now we're going to go through about 15 or 16 questions here, but just imagine you knew the answer to that question. Working for yourself, or working for someone else, you're doing the same sort of role, or are you doing something completely different? Okay, next question. So what sort of products or services are you providing in your role here now in the future? So just imagine you knew. So what are you doing? What sort of role, what sort of service are you providing now here in the future? Just imagine you knew. Everything's gone perfectly for you, and you know the answer to every question. Even if you don't, just imagine that you do. All right, next question, question number 3. So what makes you uniquely different, or what makes you unique in the role that you're now playing? Just imagine that you knew. So basically, without being too humble about it, so why are you so good at what you're doing here in the future now? Just imagine that you knew. What makes you uniquely different? What makes you better than anyone else doing a similar sort of role? Just imagine that you knew. Don't be too humble about it. All right, next question, question number 4. And as I said, we're going to do about 15, 16 questions here. We're going to go through these pretty quick. So next question. How much are you enjoying your work currently here in 2016, let's say, 5 years down the track, whatever it might be? How much are you enjoying your work out of 10? Again, just imagine everything's gone perfectly for you. You know the answer to every question. Score out of 10. How much are you enjoying your work, your ideal work now in the future? And then next question. Why are you enjoying your work in the future so much? So Basically, jot down as many reasons as you can think of. Why are you enjoying your work so much? Your ideal future, 5-year vision work. Why are you enjoying it so much? Just imagine you knew. Try and be as specific as possible. So why are you enjoying your work so much? Just imagine you knew. What are all the reasons? What are all the things that you're doing that make it so fulfilling for you? And then next question. What would need to change or what would need to be different for your score to go closer to a 10 out of 10? So, even if question number 4 here, you said, look, maybe it's scoring a 10 out of 10, or maybe it's a 9 out of 10, even if it was a 10 out of 10, what are some little things that you might be able to think of that could make it even better? Again, just imagine that you knew. What could make your work even better? What would make your work even better? Just imagine that you knew. All right, next question. All right, let's look at life outside work now. So when you're not working, score out of 10. How much are you enjoying your lifestyle outside work? And again, just imagine everything's gone really well for you. It's now 5 years down the track. Score out of 10. How much are you enjoying your life outside work? And then next question. So what are all the reasons why you're enjoying your life outside work so much? So try and be as specific as possible. Just imagine you knew. List all the things that you're doing. What sort of activities, what sort of hobbies, what sort of events are you doing? What are your interests outside work? All right, the next question. What would need to change? What would need to be different for your score to go closer to a 10 out of 10 in your life outside work? So again, this is a similar process we just did with work, but how much you're enjoying your life outside work, and then what would need to change or be different for it to be even better? And again, even if you're scoring a 9 or a 10, just imagine you knew there would be a couple of things that could make it even better. What would those things be? Just imagine that you knew. All right, let's move on to the next set of questions now. These are more around strategies and challenges. So the next question is, just imagine for a moment that, that you are mentoring someone to follow exactly in your footsteps, and they were here with you today, and what would be the 5 key things that you'd suggest they did to follow exactly in your footsteps to get where you got over the last 5 years? So just imagine you knew what those 5 things were. And again, you're mentoring them. Try and make it as simple and easy as possible for them. So try and be as specific as you can. So what 5 things would this person need to do that you are mentoring to follow exactly in your footsteps that have got you where you are now in the future? So looking back, what would have been the 5 key things that you'd recommend they did to follow exactly in your footsteps? All right, so hopefully you got 5 ideas or strategies there for the person you're mentoring to follow exactly in your footsteps. Now, if this person only had time to do one of those things, out of everything you've listed there for them, if they only had time to do one of those things, which one thing do you think would be the most important for them to do out of all the things you've advised them to do as their mentor? If they could only do one of them, which one thing do you think they could do that would be the most important? Just imagining you knew. And then next question. Let's assume over the last 5 years, so you're still in the future, looking back on the last 5 years, what have been some of the biggest challenges or obstacles you've had to overcome in the last 5 years? Let's just assume the last 5 years wasn't a complete bed of roses, but what are the 5 key things that you've had to overcome to get you successfully where you've got here now in the future? Just imagine you knew. What were those challenges? What were those obstacles? All right, and so hopefully you've got 5 challenges or obstacles there. So now let's have a look at the next question. So out of those challenges you've listed, which one do you think was the most important for you to overcome over the last 5 years? Just imagine you knew. If you only could overcome one of those challenges, which one was the most important for you to overcome that actually helped you get the furthest to where you are successfully now, here in the future? All right, now just a couple more questions. Last set of questions. This is more about future dream stuff. So question number 14. So let's just say it's now 2016. In another 10 or 15 years from now, just imagine you knew. Where will you be? Where will you be living? If everything's gone perfectly for you, just imagine. What sort of role will you be playing? Will you be doing the same sort of work, different work? Just imagine you knew. Let me just give you a minute to explore that. All right, second last question. So anything else you'd like to add or mention about your work or your life? Just imagine there was. Just anything else you want to mention. All right, then last question. Now that you know what you know about your life and your work, just imagine that you had a motto, a saying, or a credo for your life and your work. What would that motto, saying, or credo be? Just imagine you had one. Just jot something down. So you just got 30 seconds. If you're not sure, just have a first draft. What would be a slogan for your life and work? If you had to have one, what would it be? All right. So that is the end of that vision casting process. Now, let's just come back to reality now. So back into the room. So let's just do a quick check-in on that. So what we did, here we are now. You then forecast, gave yourself permission to create a vision for yourself, a future for yourself. Very rarely do we give ourselves the opportunity to do that. Now, some of you might go, oh, look, I just made that up. Some of you might go, wow, that was actually really interesting. Some of you might go, oh, that was a nice confirmation of my plans already. But the clearer we can get about our future, the more likely we are to know what the strategies along the way. Now, we did say create your ideal vision. So some of you might be going, yeah, that was my ideal. I don't know if I could really do that or not. Well, we're going to start to get really practical about this now. So what we want to do is a bit of a debrief. I'm going to ask you 3 debriefing questions. So the first one here, and this is probably the sort of stuff, these debriefing questions are probably things that you're going to need to do after this webinar, but just I want to let you know what the next steps are. Because for many of you, and I think probably the majority of you, you're going to go, wow, and what we find in the programs we run face-to-face, you're going to go, wow, actually that was a really interesting process. I actually feel much clearer and much more inspired about my future now. But the problem is I'm not sure if that's really me. I'm not sure if I could do that. Gee, in the reality of it all, I've got all these obstacles in my way. So what we want to do is actually 3 questions. The first one is do a bit of a debrief using the Career Development Blueprint. Now this is things like, and I'll come back to that in a sec, this is your skills, your interests, your values, your personality. Who are you? And do those factors get picked up in that future vision? How many of the 20 get picked up? Next question we want to ask is what's the probability of that vision you just came up with happening? So probability, score out of 100. Is it 20%, 100%, 50%? I don't know. Now, I'm not so fussed about the probability, but what's more important is why isn't it a 100% chance of happening? And shortly, what I'm going to ask you to do is list all the reasons it couldn't happen, which is kind of going to be a paradox because we're going to get negative before we can get positive here. So that you'll find in this particular step, coming up with as many reasons why you can't do it is actually going to be more helpful for you in the end result. So that's where we're aiming towards for the debrief. Now, to do the debrief, the first step, as I said, is the Career Development Blueprint. Now, so some of you may or may not have done that previously, but this is a really nice complementary tool to help prove to you whether or not that vision is a good vision for you. Now, the Lifestyle Career Development Blueprint tool will help you identify your values, your skills, your interests, and your personality profile, and we can use those factors. So the nice thing about this Career Development Blueprint, it will help you take you through a process which will really help articulate and take you through to some decision making, and it'll segment what are your top 5 values, what are your top 5 skills, top 5 interests, personality issues, and ultimately do things like a skills audit. So there's a big difference between what skills you're good at and what skills you love love using. It will help you segment those into 4 different categories. So this is really useful for doing any form of review as well. And ultimately what we're after here is we're after your one-page summary. So this is your blueprint one-page summary. For the purposes of this debrief, for this career process, it will give you an option of 6 things like values, skills, interests, personality, even obstacles and work options. But for the purpose of this debrief, we're just going to use these 4 factors here. And you'll see that there are 5 values, 5 skills, 5 interests, and 5 personality profile issues. What we want to do is see how many of those factors would exist in your future vision you've just come up with. And then what this will do is this will help you give you your score out of 20 here. So score out of 20 is generated from how many of these values would exist out of 5 in that future vision you just came up with. How many skills would you be using? How many of these top 5 skills? You know, you might give yourself a 3 or a 4 or a 5. How many of these interests would exist in that future vision? Now keep in mind, people tend to score themselves a bit low on this one. This isn't the skills you use in your work, but this is would you be using most of these interests in your life outside of work? And for most people, they would have the capacity to do that. How many of these personality issues or your profile would be matched in that vision as well? So go through each of these and you get your score out of 20. So that's how you create your lifestyle blueprint, your career development blueprint. That's how you get your 20 factors. Then what you want to see is how many of those 20 factors would exist in that vision. Then the next debrief question is what's the probability of that happening, that vision happening? And then the next one is what are all the reasons why it isn't a 100% chance of happening. Now, that will then give you a list of the obstacles and challenges that you need to then overcome. So that's all we're going to get to for this particular webinar today. So hopefully you're now feeling clearer about your future vision. Then it really now comes down to you then doing the debrief on how clear is that vision in line with who you are and what you want, your top skills, interests, values and personality criteria. And then the next thing to do would be then to sit down and work out, well, what are your obstacles or barriers, and work out some strategies towards those. So I've looked at the career development future vision process, taken you through how you can get access to the personal blueprint, skills, interests, values and personality, which will give you much more informed decisions about moving forward. And that tool anyway would be useful just to do in your in an annual review, and understanding what the barriers or obstacles that are holding you back moving forward. So for the purposes of today, that's really a snapshot of what we wanted to cover off. So good luck with that process and good luck with your career development and future vision moving forward.